Miles, thank you, sir. We'll have another song from Miles before we finish this afternoon. I want to introduce you now to someone who's going to read you a story. And it's the story of an adoptee. Would you welcome, please, Marie Barry.
I don't really have much to comment on this. I think I leave it open to yourselves. There's a lady here who wishes to remain anonymous and wants this story read so that people will hear her and let her live. I was born in Bessborough in the early 70s, adopted by a couple who had requested a baby girl with dark hair and brown eyes. My adoptive father was a loving, kind man who instantly fell in love with me. My adoptive mother never bonded with me. She was cold and unloving, and she drank heavily. I lived in a magnificent, large house, but it never felt like home. My mother was warped and controlling, extremely hard to please. I was placed with my prospective adoption parents when I was 7 weeks old. A social worker visit noted concerns about my care. I had horrendous nappy rash. There was a question of neglect. The formal adoption was delayed. Six months later, it was approved, but my adoptive parents were told not to proceed with their application to adopt another baby. This fact alone should have raised a red flag. The state did no thorough backgrounds checks on prospective adoption parents. My adoptive mother had a mental breakdown when I was a few months old. She was hospitalized, yet no one objected to my formal adoption. The system, and this is the point she really wants to make, the system was deeply flawed, and I suffered as a result. As a toddler, I would be put into a playpen for hours on end. It was a wire cage. There was no mother-daughter playtime. I was an accessory and an object to complete her family. Every week, my mother and myself went to visit my grandfather. He was a very successful businessman who employed several people. What some would describe, a pillar of the community. He was a moody man from a young age. I was very aware of how my mother behaved differently, almost childlike, when in his company. My grandfather was a paedophile. My mother suffered a horrendous childhood at his hands. As a result of the aggressive abuse, she could not have her own children. I was first abused by him at the age of 8, when we visited my grandfather one summer morning. I had no idea what had happened. All I knew was that my grandfather had inflicted pain on me. I felt dirty and sore. I barely spoke for the rest of the day. I refused to eat my lunch, and my mother became extremely irate with me and threw the remainder of the boiling hot soup at me, inflicting third-degree burns on one of my arms. The mark is still a permanent physical reminder of that day. This abuse continued every week of every month for 4 years. I often struggled and tried to stop him, but he got angry and would punish me for not complying. I have cigarette burns on my legs, inflicted by my grandfather for not willingly participating. The marks I have from the burns were never questioned by my mother, the GP, or even nurses when I was admitted to hospital at the age of 10, even though I was severely underweight. At the age of 12, I became pregnant. I miscarried. I was locked into my bedroom because I had bled on the good carpet. I miscarried alone. I will never forget the fear and pain I endured that day. My mother never spoke to me about that day, never apologized for treating me so cruelly, never wiped away my tears. My mother was complicit in my grandfather's abuse. She knew yet willingly took me with her on those weekly visits to my grandfather. I made my peace with her decades ago. She never came to terms with her own abuse. She suffered mentally. I don't blame her for my childhood. I blame, excuse me, I should have had this right. I blame the system for allowing to totally disregard the paramount importance of a child's welfare. The adoptive parents' religious affiliations and financial status were the only concerns of the system. And I think we'd all agree to that. My childhood led to years of mental torture. I used alcohol and drugs to try to drown out my memories. I self-harmed, attempted suicide. I often wonder how different my life would have been if the state had honoured my constitutional rights. The state failed me and so many others, yet to date the state has refused to acknowledge this. The effect my childhood abuse had and still has on my life is almost indescribable. I made some dreadful life choices as a result. I've done things I am not proud of. For a period of my teenage years, I was out of control. I am thankful I managed to turn my life around. To this day, I have never had the experience of a full night's unbroken sleep. I am triggered often. Enduring trauma is a life sentence. A fleeting touch on the right-hand side of my body is enough to trigger me. The most upsetting trigger for me is when my dog's paw lightly kicks me on my right side and my whole body shudders. I am re-traumatized. It upsets me most because I adore my animals. They are my family. He was repeatedly sent me into a dark place with vivid, horrendous memories and will no doubt do so on many further occasions. I was recently struck by the fact that I was just unfortunate to be the one who was adopted by my mother. It could have been any dark-haired, brown-eyed baby girl available for adoption who was born a week earlier or later than me. I am glad it was me. I would not wish my childhood on anyone else. I would not wish for any other person to have endured the pain and suffering I went through. I compartmentalize. It's my coping mechanism. I try to detach my adult self from my 8-year-old self. Today I would like to thank Marie, for kindly agreeing to speak on my behalf. I know this is not an easy read or easy to hear, but it is important that my story is heard and that my 8-year-old self is listened to and believed. To my 8-year-old self, you are stronger than you ever know. I love you and will remember you as the little carefree child you were before you were abused. I will not let the abuse taint how you should be remembered. It does not and will not define you. I fought to be the best version of you I could possibly be. I will keep fighting because you are worth so much more than what happened to you. I can only hope I have done you proud. A very sobering story being related here by somebody anonymously who doesn't wish her name to be divulged. Sorry, I left out one here. I struggled for decades to come to terms with my past. It was a long and bumpy road, but I survived. You may wonder why I choose to remain anonymous. My children know nothing about my abuse. A conscious decision I made the day my eldest was born. I did not want to inflict them with harrowing details of my life. I wanted them to grow up with no experience of unhappiness. I battled through my tough days by always striving to give the best of me to my children. I did what was right for me to be the best mother I could manage for them, to be for them. My own comment is I hope that this strong, brave lady who was among us will find solace in the words of the Lebanese poet and philosopher, Khalil Gibran. out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. Thank you very much to this lady. Well, it's a privilege to read this, and I'm sorry I skipped one of the most important paragraphs. Go to Margaret.
Wow. Thank you, Marie. And to that person, I'm looking to all the corners of this beautiful place. To you, whoever you are, what can you say to that? Except we hear you. We hear you. And we have your back. That's all we can say.